Welcome to the T2 Hubcast. Join T2 and guests as they discuss all things personal and professional development. The T2 Hubcast, brought to you by the People Performance People.
Welcome to the T2 Hubcast with me, Spencer Locker.
And me, Tracy Roberts.
Hey, Trace, welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome to the world's greatest podcast ever.
Times
four.
Long story.
Long story short, me and Tracy got in the podcast room about a week or so ago. We recorded quite definitely, I can say without shame, that it was the greatest podcast ever recorded.
Ever.
It was incredible,
Next level.
potentially award-winning stuff. And our tech failed us and it didn't record.
So what did we learn from that, Spence?
What did we learn from
Not
that?
a lot, actually, because it happened again. But
twice this morning.
It's pushed our buttons a bit, hasn't it? But
it has.
taught us a lesson.
But you know what we learn? Sometimes we've got to have the pain to learn the lesson.
We have.
So that's very, very relevant to the podcast, the subject we're going to talk about today. So just to try and sort of summarize some of the things that we got up to a couple of weeks ago. We're working with doing a session with a group of delegates. And we had a bit of an honesty exercise, and it was like, who's being your authentic self? And everybody said, yeah, I'm my authentic self. And we understand that when you're your authentic self, you bring positivity, and you bring a great positive can-do. Even no matter what your unconscious motivators, if you're being your authentic self, then you're being allowed to be your authentic self. Then that's a good place to be. So okay, then who was their authentic selves 5 years ago? And people sort of chunted a little bit and looked around and went, well, yeah, okay, I was my authentic self 5 years ago. Nothing specific about 5 years, just a nominal figure. Said, okay, then, so are you the same person as you were 5 years ago? And everybody looked at each other and went, well, not really, no. No, sort of earth-shattering changes, but you grow and evolve, don't you?
Yeah.
So 5 years ago, you're being your authentic self, and you are one person, and now 5 years later, you're still being your authentic self, or you are being your authentic self again, but you're a different person, not chalk and cheese, but just a little bit of a nudge in a different direction or a different place. So when we sort of looked at that, we went, right, so 5 years' time, that's sort of suggesting that if you're being your authentic self in 5 years' time, you're probably going to be different to who you are today. And that doesn't mean that at any stage you've been sort of inauthentic or unauthentic, or call it what you will. But it just means that through life's trials and tribulations, the lessons learned, the good things, the not so good things, the challenges, the ups, the downs, and all this, that, and the other, we evolve. We adapt, we learn, we see things in a slightly different way, but we're still being our authentic selves. So then we started thinking about, well, how is that possible? What can influence that? Because again, we ran into a bloke called Gerald last year. I remember Gerald quite specifically because when we had this exercise, Gerald turned around when I said, is anybody a different person to who they were 5 years ago? And Gerald went, me? No, I'm not. I'm exactly the same as I was 5 years ago. Exactly. And he was quite defiant about that. Again, in that session, he did turn around and say, you're not going to change me. I don't want to change you, Gerald. I really don't. I just want you to be the best version of your authentic self.
But some people don't see the small nuances, do they?
No.
They think I am the same person. Yes, of course you are. Your value system's generally the same. And, a lot of your self, in best self, as we call it, would be similar. But it's the little small things that have changed. So even Gerald might not have felt it, but it's the small things. Of course, you're slightly different. Of course you are. But again, I think that makes a really good point. Some people think when we're talking about change and growth, etc., that it's you must do that, or that you have to be this inauthentic person to go through growth. That's not true, is it? It's about dialing up. Or dampening in some cases some of the attributes. So
that's an interesting one because 5 years ago I would have I wouldn't have paid much attention to the thermostat, whereas nowadays it's a priority for mine and I'm dialing it down.
You are. I'll bet you are. Yeah, because you bank screaming at you if you don't. But so I mean, we're talking about, I guess what we're talking about is mindset, aren't we? And that's where we're going with this today. It's although we are authentically us in shadow and best self, there is still movement somewhere, day to day, year by year, minute by minute, with mindset. And mindset plays a massive part in how we see the world, how we react to the world. So here is the quote on what it actually means. A mindset is a mental attitude or disposition that predetermines a person's response and their interpretation of situations. Okay. So essentially what we're saying there is that the way you see the world through your lens is part of your mindset, but also it's that interpretation of situations. So I was just thinking about this now and thinking of, when you get an email and you read it and you go, oh my God, this is terrible.
Yeah.
And you get all defensive, or you get angry, or you get frustrated. And if you go back to that email 2 days later when you're in a better place, what I've learned is don't respond to the email.
Yeah. Well, it's your chimp, isn't it? I mean, when your chimp's there, it reframes everything to its own agenda. So as soon as there's something comes up where you've got an email and your boss has CC'd in on it, and it's like, whoa,
rage.
And then the chimp's going, you got my attention. Yeah. And then it reinterprets everything in a fashion of attack.
Yeah. But if I did that when I was in a good place or disposition, to put it in inverted commas, I'd probably read that a little bit differently. Might still not agree with some of the content, but I'd be very mindful how I, deal with that situation. Whereas if I'm reading that when I'm tired, I'm not in a good place, I've maybe had a couple of failures this week in terms of like my task focus. Yeah. I would definitely read that more in a threat state than a challenge state, shall we say. And like from a mindset in general, I think people forget that, as you said, trials, tribulations, successes, failures, all those things, they affect our mindset on a daily basis. But what actually sets us up for that as part of our unconscious motivators, as we know, is our upbringing, our culture, our values, our education, what we experience during. And that can be a big thing for people actually about learning, can't it? And that affects actually what kind of position we're in when pushed into certain situations. So we sometimes have, referring back to the chimp paradox, as well as the chimp, we talk about having gremlins in our system. So things that we might have experienced that were negative in the past, that actually we kind of replay in our mind. So before we get to a situation, we already think failure, or we already think of the worst possible consequence. And we find it really difficult to get around that. And I think that gremlin plays a part in this mindset piece, doesn't it? Because it's almost like this blocker to go through the door. It's like, if you push through here, there's nothing but like pain. And it goes round and round in your head and plays a part in, you don't want to feel like you did last time, or you don't want to be put in that position. But the reality is that we've got to think about how we can push past that gremlin or get around that gremlin. And some people look at it as, are you fixed, or do you have a growth mindset? For me, I think they're two complete extremes, but it's not as black and white as that.
Right. It's not a binary choice.
No. But a fixed mindset is, that if you believe that your success is based on innate ability, right? So, you would just look at a situation and say straight away, yeah, I couldn't do that. So I'll give you a really good example of that. When I was working with a couple of people last week on communicating with impact, a couple of the guys that were on the module were more on the reflective side in terms of their print profiling, definitely not expressive people that really wanted to be gregarious and get up at the front. And part of their element of their fixed mindset in this case was, we want to be push more growth, because in our brains, our gremlins say, do you remember that last time you stood up in front of a group of people and you felt really out of your comfort zone and your palms started to sweat and you're just not built for this, you're an introvert, and you could argue that, there's a fixed element in there, maybe a gremlin from a couple of things that have gone wrong in the past, but that's not because they don't want to do it, it's because the fear is keeping them in that fixed mindset, if that makes sense. People who've got a growth mindset, they believe that success can be achieved through hard work, dedication, learning and development, and pain sometimes. And I don't think that there's a fixed, you're in a fixed mindset or you're a growth mindset. And we see a lot of this kind of reference when it comes to workplaces, don't we? Or that person over there has got a very fixed mindset. I would argue that we're going to look at something today that shows us that everybody has an ability to have some form of growth in their mindset. It's not as binary as we think it is. So there was a lady called Carol Dweck, Back in 2006, she wrote a book called The New Psychology of Success. And within that book, she introduced this concept of the fixed and the growth mindset. So it's brought out a lot of stuff. And if you type that into Google right now, you'll find everything available on that. And it's usually like one side's good, one side's bad, or this is what this brings and this is what this brings. And of course, it goes without saying that, research does state that a growth mindset at work can lead to a really innovative environment and a buzzy environment. But I would argue that there's more to it than that. And if you read a little bit more into it, there's a guy called James Anderson actually took this concept from Carol Dweck and he built out this further kind of research and model around it actually being a growth continuum. Now, I think I felt better about that because I definitely can look at myself and think there's things that are high growth for me and things that are a little bit more fixed. And it's based on all those things we said at the beginning, experiences, gremlins, all those things. And I bet you're the same. There's certain things you'd look at and go, yeah, it's a no from me. And there's other things I feel the opposite. Yeah. So for me, I quite like this concept. So I looked at it a little bit more and I know, I've been doing a bit of work with this and I thought, I see it as a real negative if people put themselves in that box of saying, I'm someone who's got low growth. I'm not someone who's brave enough to step out and take the risks that allow me to go through that, into that growth. And we're going to even talk about infinite mindsets today. I would say that everybody does something that's growth. They just need to realize that and realign themselves with it. You don't have to be high growth in all of these areas. You just have to know where you sit and where you can put the work in to make a difference. So I wanted to just introduce this concept of this spectrum of growth. Do you agree that there is a spectrum of growth for most people?
Yeah. I do agree. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting concept because it's very interesting from the perspective of clever people do a lot of research and they try and make it palatable for people who aren't quite as clever. Well, I don't mean that. I don't mean that in a negative way.
Yeah.
But when you've got people who are into psychology, psychotherapy, or all sorts of bits and pieces, then they are academic people who have achieved quite good things. However, the result of their studies needs to be passed down to us mere mortals.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when they do that, they've got to formulate it in a way that's palatable to us. So it's not too complex. So it's not too this, it's not too that. Which is I get it, I do.
Yeah.
However, when it gets to the point where it's a binary thing, very few things in life are binary. You're one or the other. We talk about this about change when we start talking about change. So we've seen people, we've worked with organizations where people will go through a period of change, not necessarily an organizational thing, but it could be a team thing, a group thing, where a leader will go in and sort of say, right, this is what we've been doing and you've been doing it really, really well. But now what we're going to do is this. And they expect everybody to punch the air,
get on the bus.
Whooping and hollering, got you covered, Skip. Yeah. But there's going to be people in that room that need more information.
Of course.
So they're sat there stroking the chin and the leader's going, oh, you're resistant to change. No, I just need more information.
There's just a little bit of a wall and we need to actually help them move their open door. That's the way I see it.
So when we start looking at that, we can see that there's a spectrum.
Yeah, of course.
And it's exactly the same with this. When we start talking about closed mindset or growth mindset, negative mindset, positive mindset, call it what you will, you think to yourself, right, well, people are going to fit in one or the other. And that's not the case.
Yeah, and we're trying to avoid people. We know that perfectionism is on the rise, you know, and in the Western world, it's a really big thing. We're very much individualists, and that puts a lot of pressure on ourselves. The more perfectionism there is, we need to achieve these things. I need to have high growth. We can give ourselves just a harder time about things. And we always say to people, don't go everything at once. Think of the things you can control the controllable, be clear on what your outcomes are, and start to chip away at things. Don't go full in. So if you feel that, to achieve this infinite or high growth mindset, it's just a world away at the moment, putting that extra pressure on yourself to achieve that very quickly is really bad. So actually being able to break it down makes more sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. And not only that, but what mindset you've got today doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the mindset of the future. I mean, it grows and it develops, and that's what we alluded to at the beginning.
Yeah.
Have you got an example of that you might have experienced in sort of a changing of a mindset?
Yeah, well, for me, I think the biggest thing for me was probably that I can think of personally was having a child. Like the way I saw the world and the way I approached things in the world was very different back before I had my child. And I think even in that 9 months before I actually gave birth to my child, I felt my mindset and the way I saw the world change. Some of it was more positive because I felt like I was stepping into this brave new position, if you like, and really embracing the fact that I was growing a human. And then the other stuff where I maybe would have been a little bit more brave, maybe a little bit more, I don't know, bold about certain things, I started to see it a little bit more cautiously because I had a baby.
Yeah.
Then I had the baby. She's 13 now. And that whole 13-year experience for me has been a whole journey of high growth, low growth, stuck in the mud, seeing the world slightly differently, different age brackets as they grow up and how they adapt, and then how you adapt. The way I see my work change straight away, my career, all those things. I mean, for me, that was the biggest change for me.
Yeah.
But some of it does lean back to like what you learn in your spectrum. But the other thing I was going to say was that actually for some people, that lack of growth or that low sort of fixed mindset always gets a bad press, right? And in some situations, particularly if you're a leader trying to manage someone with that can be frustrating. However, what I would point out is that it's not always a negative thing, right? Some people use a fixed mindset to pull themselves through a really challenging situation in the short term. It's the only way that they can get through. And it's about actually having the ability to be resilient, but still have a fixed mindset because of the way you do things and the way you approach things. So if you think of like some of the challenging things you've been through in your life, at that moment, you weren't this sparkling kind of example of, infinite mindset and wisdom. You were someone who thought, I know how I think I can best get through this. And I'm going to go into a tunnel for a little while. And hopefully when I come out the other side, I'm going to feel different. And then I'll reflect. And then I might be in a growth mindset. I might start to think of things differently. So, I'm not saying that a fixed mindset is always a good thing. However, it can be used as a coping mechanism. It doesn't mean that you've got no resilience. In actual fact, it means you might have high resilience because you know what to do. So, okay, we're talking it from a works perspective. So we know that research states that, if you've got a big growth mindset kind of environment, challenge state, language and behaviors going on, there's increased innovation, high psychological safety, and probably great outputs as well, because we're always thinking of new things, which is great. And a part of that is self-awareness for people as well, isn't it? They need to know where they sit. So within the spectrum of growth, rather than it just being fixed growth, we actually talk about high growth. And for those of you who are listening in now who follow Simon Sinek's work, he's also released a book called The Infinite Mindset, which is a really good book actually. And actually this explains this high growth area really, really well, and giving great examples. But instead of it being fixed in growth, let's look at the type of things that you can kind of measure yourself on. And I guess the idea behind this is that you can go down this list, and rather than thinking of it across one line, the different lines where you think you sit right now, where you're high, where you're low, where there's work can be done. And then maybe I can ask you where you think you're low, Spence, actually. Let's do that. So the first thing is worldview. Okay. Yeah. What lens you see the world through, in like a generalistic approach. So I suppose this would be, if you're going to go on a sliding scale of, low to high across the board, the worldview might be the one that you kind of score yourself as an average, So for instance, if you were fixed, you'd see yourself as unchanging and unchangeable in most situations. And if you were super high, you understand that you can change most basic characteristics and you can adapt to suit things to go towards a goal. So there's a polar extreme there. The next thing is challenges. So how you face a challenge. Goes without saying that, sometimes it's the amount of support you get, it's the environment you're in, but how you deal with a challenge. Maybe there's a little bit of resilience in there as well, right? Obstacles. So as an example, if you were low on that scale, you would be someone who gives up really quickly on things if you think you're not going to get a quick win, if that makes sense. Whereas at the end, you might be relentless. Relentless is a big word, isn't it? Yeah. Effort. If you're low, you might feel that effort is associated with failure, and that you might avoid things that you don't find easy. So for some people, they don't want to put themselves in a position where they feel stupid, as an example. They're a bit out of their comfort zone. Therefore, if it requires a little bit too much, they associate that maybe because of one of these gremlins with failure. Whereas if they were high, that they know the pathway to mastery is actually to develop strategies towards effective effort, if that makes sense. Feedback, this is a big one. This is one of my sticking points. So you tend to ignore negative feedback because you see that as a list of your faults, would be low. Whereas high, you seek out feedback and you want to learn from other people and improve your processes and outcomes as a consequence. You see that as a real opportunity to grow. Success of others. Now, I think this is an interesting one. You might feel threatened by others and find yourself forming comparisons and avoiding competitions that expose your deficits. So if you're low, you are constantly comparing yourself to other people. And it might not always be external in terms of jealousy or anger or frustration, but you see success of other people as is the opposite to you sometimes. Whereas if you were on high on the scale for that, you'd seek out other masters and experts in an effort to learn their secrets and see competition as a way to push each other.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's a positive thing. Mistakes. You see that you need to hide from your mistakes or ignore them, okay, if you're low. Whereas if you're high, you might want to stretch yourself so errors actually have high learning potential. And you kind of know that this will enable your future growth. So you kind of expect of you. You're the kind of let's do it now and apologize later kind of person. And then the last one, which is a really, really interesting one, is help and support. You may turn down offers of help or support because you think it highlights your deficits. Or you can accept some help as an example, but you don't like to be seen to be helped, if that makes sense. Whereas if you're high, you seek out help and supply from respected sources and you learn from them. So there's a lot more to this fixed and growth, isn't there?
Yeah.
High growth is that last column there. And for me, I could go down that list right now, and rather than seeing myself as am I fixed, am I growth, or am I in the middle today, I can say, right, okay, the things that I know I'm low on personally, help and support is my lowest. I'm an 8-2 for those of you who know print, that's strong and self-reliant, needed and appreciated. For me, I want to help other people first, and I also am strong and self-reliant, so I would not go and put the pressure on someone else. I'd do it myself. So I find that I have to work really, really hard to actually be vulnerable enough to go, I'm drowning a bit. And I've always been the same. I will actually jump in even when I'm struggling and help someone else. So I need to focus on that because that really does affect my productivity sometimes and my time management at times. The other thing that I used to struggle with, but I'm actually getting a lot better at now, is feedback. My 2 feels exposed when I get feedback that's negative. So I naturally go to a place where I take it personally. But I have also realized from some situations I've been pushed into, unbeknownst to me sometimes, that actually what I've learned from those situations is if someone's trying to be kind, not nice, and they're giving me good feedback and I respect them, and I think that's a big thing for me actually. If I can look at you and respect you, I'll take your feedback. I struggle with the people that I don't know enough about. So I'm still going to put myself in the middle on that, because I think in the right situation, I take that as an absolute, vault to something else. If it's someone I don't respect or value their opinion, I struggle a little bit still. And I still sometimes see that as a bit of a dent to my 2. But I definitely have got better. But there are the things that I'm putting a little bit of extra work into at the moment to actually solicit feedback, to go and ask for it. And when it comes to help and support, automatically I'm switching my brain into collaborative mode on a lot of things where normally I'd go, I can get this done in 10 minutes. So those are my 2 things that I know I need to work. There's a couple in there that are still in the middle, or, they're not quite at the top. But for me, allowing myself that space to go, okay, I think I'm high growth in a lot of areas, but there's still a few things I can work on. There might be other people that go, actually, I'm the opposite way around. I'm actually pretty low to mid on some of those. There's maybe one thing that I need to give myself more credit on, if that makes sense. Do you think there's anything there that you kind of resonate with?
Definitely the feedback. Definitely the feedback. I like feedback. I like positive feedback. I like constructive feedback.
Yeah.
But it does depend on where the feedback's coming from. I need to, the person who's giving me feedback needs to have credibility in my eyes.
Yeah.
And one of my pet hates is hypocrites.
Yeah.
They lose all credibility. So to give you an example, as you know, I'm type 2 diabetic. I've been sort of dealing with that. I've sort of dealt with it. I'm dealing with it, but dealt with it for the last 3 years. But I went for a review a couple of weeks ago, and obviously the nurse does all the checks, height, weight, blood pressure, all this, that, and the other. And then she sort of turns around to me, and she's sort of got that furrowed brow look on her face, and she says, I think I'm a little bit concerned about your weight. I think your weight is a little bit of a concern for me. And I'm thinking, well, I exercise every day. And yes, okay, I'm no Slim Jim, but I exercise every day and I put a lot of effort into it. Whereas she is obese.
Yeah.
Now I know she's a diabetic. She's a
specialist in that area.
Yeah, specialist in that area.
But at that moment, you thought,
but well,
okay.
why should hark at you? Hark at you. Who are you to tell me about my? So straight away, I'm getting defensive.
Yeah, so you're going back down the scale again.
Yeah. However, when somebody, and it's not just her, it's other people. When somebody starts criticizing me for something, it's obvious they don't know why I did what I did.
Yeah, or they don't know all the facts.
Yeah.
They're not a subject matter expert.
And it might be coming from a good place, but I'm just sort of sitting there thinking, you don't know.
But you just answered your own question there. And I don't think you realize this, but you kind of went into growth to high growth there, because what you were able to tune back in on, because you did what she told you. You went and did what she...
Yeah.
But what you hung on to was, she's the expert in medication, stroke, the next steps. So you had to literally, at that point, switch off that negativity in your head of saying, I'm not being funny, love, but, were you in the gym with me at 5 o'clock this morning?
Yeah.
And you had to go, okay, I have to park that side, because that's me being almost a little bit judgmental about her life.
Yeah.
I'm going to listen to her about the facts that she knows more about than me.
Yeah.
That will hopefully lead to me, feeling better.
Yeah.
So without even realizing it, you've managed to establish that.
Yeah.
And move forward.
But it did take me a couple of days.
Exactly. But it got there. And I think it's brilliant that you can admit that, because I think there'll be loads of people out there who would resonate with that, particularly in the workplace. You think, well, do you know my job? Have you been on the shop floor? Have you, and it's other people in your life, you'll look at people and they'll give you a bollocking. So someone who drinks a lot, and then they'll give you a discussion around, smoking. And you think, well, so I think what I want people to think about is, cut yourself some slack. There's probably something on there you're very high growth or infinite, but there's also things on there that, you probably can be really honest with yourself. And instead of just looking at it from a fixed and a high growth mindset perspective, the stuff that's high growth, how can you be more infinite? The stuff that's low to middle, what can you work on as to really make a difference? And I think for me, that, I'm going to use an example of a school that I saw research on a few days ago. They started to go, instead of go yes or no, as in pass or fail, they went pass or not yet. And I think if people can apply that to their head and say not yet to most things, that will equal growth.
Yeah.
And I think they saw some really good results from that at that school, because it wasn't saying to the kids, no, you haven't reached the grade. It was not yet. And here's the pointers and how you can get it right. Quickly, because I know we've only got a few more minutes.
Yeah.
A couple of things to think.
Okay.
3 pointers.
3 points.
First one, understanding. Don't use that fixed and growth mindset kind of way of looking at things as a bit of a crutch or a default. Use it as a power to prime and prepare your mind. So if you know where you're slightly lower, use it. And if you know where you're slightly higher, use it as well. And see as a positive that you can understand where you are. And it will change daily, monthly, weekly, yearly. Okay. Second clue that's going to get you to the next stage is to think about step changes. So when you're looking at that, don't go, how do I get from low to extremely high? Don't jump straight in. Think about actually how you can keep it as a spectrum, the little marginal gains that you can make, the little differences in the way you speak to yourself in certain situations, and how you then approach that situation. And the last one is give yourself healthy benchmarks. Look at what's good and actually aim for, achieving those levels. But make sure that you apply authenticity and healthy challenge in anything that you see. If you can do that, on that spectrum, you're going to see a change. And here's the thing, if you slide back sometimes because of situations, it's all right.
Yeah.
It's completely natural. You just got to know how to get back up there.
Yeah. Excellent. I think that's a great message to finish on. Tracy Roberts, I think we can all agree that was an awesome podcast.
It wasn't the best podcast ever.
No, but it was
decent.
Yeah, it was getting there. Thank you very much, Tracy.
Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. So that's the end of the podcast. Hopefully, we'll see you. We'll speak to you again next time. Until then, bye bye now.
Bye bye.
Introducing the T2 Leadership Retreat 2023, the ultimate leadership development experience from the people performance people. Join us at the prestigious Grove Resort in Hertfordshire for our annual leadership retreat, where you will be joined by other senior industry leaders in this immersive 3-day experience. The T2 Leadership Retreat will include a 3-night all-inclusive stay at the 5-star Grove Resort, multiple leadership tasks, sessions and challenges, an in-depth personal leadership 360 report, an exciting off-site activity at a nearby location, as well as access to psychometric profiling and self-awareness tools. The retreat will be facilitated by experienced professionals from the world of business, the military and professional sport, and will feature high-profile guest speakers Sir Dave Brailsford, Director of Sport for Ineos, and former New Zealand Rugby Union captain Sean Fitzpatrick. To book your place on the ultimate leadership experience of the year, or for more information, please contact help@transferperformance.com.
Are you a fan of our podcast? If so, make sure you're following us on all of our social media channels. You can find us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter by searching Trans2 Performance. By following us, you'll have access to exclusive content, special announcements, and more. Join the T2 community today.